Hey everybody, Father Warner here. Now, technically, Monday tomorrow, remember I always record on Sunday a day before. So technically tomorrow is the solemnity of the nativity of John the Baptist. But as I have been doing, I've been focusing on the first reading. So I'm going to take the text that would have appeared on Monday of the 12th week in ordinary time. And I do this because I want to help you study scripture, not merely meet your liturgical needs for the Eucharist. So I'm saying this because people will still write into me and say, Father, you got the wrong text. I have not got the wrong text. In the comment section, the first comment today, I'll post a link for a previous teaching that I did on the solemnity of John the Baptist. So if you want it, go to the description box or the first comment, click on it, and hopefully it'll take you to a teaching on the solemnity of the nativity of John the Baptist. But the text that would have been for Monday of the 12th week in ordinary time is from 2 Kings chapter 17 verses 5 to 8, 13 to 15a, and then verse 18. I recommend you read the whole of 2 Kings chapter 17. And I want to do this because this was perhaps one of the key moments in Israelite history. This text will tell us, sounds the death knell really of the northern kingdom, because we are going to discuss today the Assyrian captivity. Remember, we have a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. I told you after David and Solomon, you don't have a united kingdom anymore. You have two kingdoms. The northern kingdom, which is called Israel, has its capital in Samaria, and you have the southern kingdom, which consisted of two tribes. The northern kingdom was 10 tribes. The southern kingdom had two tribes. It was called Judah, with its capital in Jerusalem. Now, the first captivity happens in 721 BC, which is the text of today. The second captivity is 586 BC, almost a good 150 plus years later, and that's when the southern kingdom will fall, and that's called the Babylonian captivity. We are doing the first exile, that's the Assyrian captivity. And ironically, we are never going to hear of these 10 tribes in the north again, because they are going to be decimated. They are going to be scattered all over in Assyria. But we need to understand, so this teaching today has two parts. You generally ask what happened and you ask why it happened. So I'm going to do literally a what happened and why it happened. But remember, you need to read 2 Kings chapter 17 in order to understand this, the full nature. So the first part of the text of today will tell you the what, and the second and the larger part of today will tell you why. So remember, God is more interested in the why than God is interested in the what. Okay, so but let me also do the what happened. So we know that from today's text that the northern kingdom of 10 tribes called Israel, with its capital in Samaria, falls in the year 721 to the Assyrians. Now, the king at this point of time, the king in the north, and I'm not referring to the Game of Thrones for those who watch it, but the king in the northern kingdom is a king called Hoshea, and I made mention of him a few days earlier. Now, it was Hoshea that assassinated the former king. His name was Pekah, and Hoshea begins his own dynasty in the northern kingdom. He rules for a total of 9 years until, of course, he's taken prisoner by the Assyrians. Now, one thing we can say about Hoshea was, like all the kings in the north, he also committed idolatry. He worshipped pagan gods. Remember that all the kings in the northern kingdom, all the 19 kings, for over 200 years after Solomon, all of them were idolatrous. Okay, and you can see it took God 200 years, because at the end of this text, some of you might say, isn't God vengeful? It took him 200 years, as he will say, of warning, and then God, of course, he acts. So we know that at this point of time there are great changes in the international scene. There were two superpowers. In the north you had Assyria, and then in the south, and when I say south, I mean south of Israel, or south of the northern and southern kingdom, was Egypt. So in the north Assyria, in the south you had Egypt, both of whom were superpowers, and Egypt's capital at that time was called Sais, Sais, okay, Sais. It's not Cairo at that point of time, it was Sais. Now, in the year 727 BC, the king in Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser, 722, 727, sorry, in 727 the king dies, and you have a new king called Shalmaneser the fifth who takes over. Now, remember that at this point of time, the northern kingdom under King Hoshea was a vassal state of Assyria, which means that they paid tribute to Assyria in order that Assyria protects them and keeps them safe from the neighbors. They regarded Assyria as the superpower, and in return, of course, they got a sense of protection. But even more, as a consequence of these alliances, there was a lot of exchanges that took place. Religiously, their gods became your gods, and their people married your people. So there was complete chaos in terms of fidelity to Yahweh was very little. Each one was doing whatever they thought best. Now, Hoshea at this point of time decides to turn court, and instead of, while on paper he is a vassal of Assyria, he approaches through messengers Egypt, and he tries to make an alliance. But we know that Shalmaneser the fifth gets wind of it and decides to imprison King Hoshea. Now, without a king, Samaria was for the picking. So we know the Assyrians come southwards, and they surround the walls of Samaria. They lay siege to it for 3 years. Now, it's very interesting to note that these walls were solid walls, and they were solid walls because they were made by King Omri. You will remember King Omri as the king of Ahab, yeah, the wicked king who married Jezebel, a Sidonian princess. So Omri had really built very strong walls, and so it took almost 3 years for the Assyrians to finally break through the walls of Samaria and then take them captive. Now, the Assyrians had a cruel sense of as overlords. So when they defeated a nation, they decimated them, and they would take all the noblemen, all the princes, all the artisans, everyone into captivity, and they would scatter them. And our first reading tells us that they were scattered all over Hala. Okay, Hala was on the river Habor, and taken into Assyria in Hala and scattered all over. Now, the reason why they scattered them was so that they could not regroup. So you take a few and you mix them, and then you send them. It's like sending some to Maharashtra and some to Gujarat and some to Goa. They have no chance to regroup. Now, we know from a pillar that exists, an Assyrian pillar, which recorded the battles that took place, that 27,280 people, Israelites from the northern kingdom, were taken into captivity. And we also know how they were taken into captivity. It was a long march, thousands of miles, and here's the terrible thing. Fish hooks were inserted into their lips, and they were chained one to the other. So if you tried to run, you'd rip the other person's face. So it was a cruel, it was a humiliating walk. Now, remember I said what happened. We've discussed the what. Most of our text today discusses the why it happened. You might try to justify this, as many people would, by saying, oh, it was a geopolitical change, it was a social change. Scripture is very clear. This did not happen because of geopolitics. Yeah, you have a new superpower. No, it happened because of sin. Sin that spanned 200 years. And that's the reason why today's text, the bulk of today's text, focuses on the why and not on the what happened. The what is taken as a given, but the why is important. And this captivity took place, this punishment took place because of sin. Now, God in the text today says, I have given you warnings. And very interestingly, he says, warnings were given to Israel, which have now been taken into captivity. But God also warned at the same time Judah and the southern kingdom, though it took him another 150 years to act against these people, the two tribes in the south. But God says this, very interesting. Read the text. He says, all my prophets, all my seers were sent to you. So not some, I sent you all of them. And the warnings were very specific. God says, I want you to turn away from your wicked ways and I want you to keep my commandments. But, as we are told in today's text, and listen to this, they did not listen. Yeah, today I was telling a young man, I said, as young people, you do not listen. And then when you grow older, there's ample time to live in regret. Too late. Yeah. So one is always to be open when somebody tells you something. It's very hard. Sometimes I get feedback. It's very hard to listen to feedback. Yes. But when you do not listen to others, I see people unwilling to listen at all. So they were not willing to listen to God. Yeah. And sometimes we can live in spiritual stubbornness. Yeah. Even if God is speaking through us, through a priest, through a bishop, through an angel, yeah, we do not want to listen. We just don't want to listen. But we are very pious. We say our rosary, we go to mass. Listen to what God is saying very often to you. They did not listen, they were stubborn. And when you don't listen, the second consequence is this. This great, as I speak of spiritual stubbornness, I see this with a lot of people. Yeah, I am not willing to budge, to move. Then God said, you despised my laws. This is a very strong word. You not ignored it. You despised it. You hated it. And you despised the covenant that I made with your ancestors. And you despised my warning. So you can see God uses this word, you despised, you hated me. I often say it's very hard to go to hell. And I say this tongue in cheek. And I've said this before, but I'll explain myself, To go to hell, you really have to say, I reject God completely. I reject His laws. I reject His commandments. I hate God. And we know from the very nature of God that He is forgiving. He is a God of mercy. So that is the reason why we have purgatory, that place of purification, because there is always sin in us. And we need to be cleansed before we go into the wonderful and the holy presence of God. We've got to be completely holy in order to be admitted into heaven. Yeah, so it's hard to get into hell. Yeah, now don't use this as therefore you can continue to commit sin. That's not the point I'm making. I'm trying to tell you that if God is merciful, you've got to despise His laws, despise His covenant, you've got to despise His warnings, you've got to despise God. That's the level. So they despised God. And therefore God acted very swiftly upon the people of the northern kingdom. Now, I said God acted swiftly, but it took God 200 years to do this, and 19 kings, and many prophets, and many seers. So you can see that, God Himself negotiated with His people. He wanted to win His people back. They were not willing to be won over. And then God acted. Now, sometimes there are people who think that every time something goes wrong, it's because of sin. Do not attribute everything that goes wrong in your life to sin. Or you look at somebody, they got cancer, and you say, oh, they must have done something wrong. This is, just jumping a little too much. Please don't do that. It's not fair to the person. I also touched upon this point today about in the northern kingdom, the people of Israel were not faithful to Yahweh and they worshipped other gods. They married the people from Assyria and therefore worshipped Baal. Now, I have got this question many times and I've answered it. What is my take on mixed marriages? I want to say this very, very clearly. You have to look at these cases on a case-by-case basis. There is no standard answer. Very often you might find The church, by the way, discourages it. That's the reason why you have to apply for a disparity of cult. The church doesn't just dispense it, it discourages it, and it has its own forms of examining the couple on a case-by-case basis. But when it comes to a point where we have to, say how do we move forward, what is important to see is not the non-Christian party or the person of the other faith. It's important to look at the Catholic party. Is the Catholic party already a professing Catholic? Is the Catholic party willing to continue to practice their faith? Or are they going to, tomorrow just backslide and say, okay, I don't go to church? So very often, and I must say this, that when parents force children to get married in church because, they want a church marriage, I have found that the Catholic party who these parents are pushing is already not practicing. They're not practicing. And the parents insist, and this just leads to a bigger mess in my mind. But if the Catholic party is practicing, is willing to preserve the faith, is willing to share their faith openly with the other person and tell the other party, I will not and cannot and will not participate in any of your religious ceremonies. I respect you as my spouse. You are free to practice. I hope my life will influence you to follow Christ. That makes greater sense. So that's in brief. This is a very long. We can have a question answer session on this. But just to answer this, since many people ask me about mixed marriages. So God bless you. Enjoy the solemnity of John the Baptist, not merely in its celebratory forms that we have grown to understand, but more in the life and the manner of life that John lived it, worthy of the Messiah, the one who prepared the way. Today, prepare the way. John means that God has been gracious. Today, that's the meaning of John. Today, you can reflect on how God has been gracious to you. Bye for now. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. Sorry, it's been a long teaching today.